Is there something about that international upbringing that contributes to where you are today?
Space shuttle and test pilots and astronauts and going to the moon and going to Mars and looking out beyond yourself and not being provincial. I think those are all helpful. They cause you to keep an open mind toward things.
Today we're going to talk about the future of Bitcoin with one of its biggest proponents, and by biggest I mean over $1 billion. Michael Saylor is the founder and CEO of MicroStrategy. I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist. We help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs go where they're treated best, from lower taxes to dual citizenship to international opportunities. And I'm excited to welcome Mr. Saylor today. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
You must be, I think, because you explain crypto better than perhaps anyone I've heard. I've listened to some of your interviews, and the way you explain it historically, as someone who I think came from a background that was not, entirely, it was a little bit crypto skeptical. You must explain it better than anyone, and I think you're one of the top 5 guys now in this space talking about crypto. Am I correct on that?
You're too kind. I'm happy to do my part for the team.
But you are really been out there because you run MicroStrategy, and I want to talk about what your company does and how that factors into this in a moment. But I saw just recently on your Twitter feed, your company has moved its treasury into Bitcoin. You own almost 71,000 Bitcoins. How does that feel?
Great, feels great. Look, I think that Bitcoin is the technically superior asset in the world. It's digital gold, and if I had to figure out how to invest a treasury, I'd have to go through, do I want to own cash? Do I want to own gold? Do I want to own an index of stocks or bonds or commercial real estate? And the ideal thing to own is, 1/21 millionth of everything there's ever going to be, and if Bitcoin is like Manhattan in cyberspace, then we bought 71,000 city blocks of it. And it's a long duration safe haven asset. You can't debase it. It's not a fiat derivative like a bond or a stock. And so if you're looking to the long term, out like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, then owning Bitcoin is like encrypting your monetary energy in a way that will preserve it without any degradation over the long term. So I feel great about it.
I want to go back to go back to the beginning for a second. I was reading about you and your childhood. Your father was in the Air Force. Is that correct?
Yeah, my father's career, non-commissioned officer in the United States Air Force, 30 years. I lived on military bases, Air Force bases, my entire life as a youth. We moved around here and there. I lived in Japan. I lived in New Zealand. I lived in Colorado. I lived in Nebraska. Lived in Florida. Lived in Ohio. Here and there in Virginia.
Do you think that had an impact? Because I think, as the go where you're treated best people, and I look at people who have this international upbringing, who move around. I even think for myself, we moved around the same city growing up, from suburb to suburb. I almost think that was a little bit of rootlessness, nothing compared to you, but I feel like what you experienced, perhaps that was the impetus for this contrarian way of thinking and being such an innovator. Is there something about that international upbringing that contributes to where you are today?
I think so. I mean, I think it was really a good formative experience to see other cultures and to travel the world. I think that opens your mind to things. I thought it was very positive influence to live on Air Force bases. Air Force is a very forward technology thinking organization. There are airplanes around. They're always thinking about the future. I thought that was useful. I discovered science fiction very early on, and I read everything by science fiction authors like Robert Heinlein, and that had an impact on me. So the combination of all those things, and Air Force is about space shuttle and test pilots and astronauts and going to the moon and going to Mars and looking out beyond yourself and not being provincial. I think I think those are all helpful. They cause you to keep an open mind toward things.
Those are values that shaped where you are today, growing up on the bases.
Yeah, I thought it was really great to grow up on bases because it's a very merit-based egalitarian structure, which sounds kind of odd to say because everybody's got ranks. But the point is, at the end of the day, there was a profound belief that the most meritorious would advance, and you felt safe, and everything was based upon integrity and duty and trust. And it's like it's a felony, I think, to commit adultery on a military base. So this idea that you cheat on your wife or something and it's a crime, it's like very, very interesting. They had different sets of values, as opposed to, living off a base where you've got lots of other politics that impinge on your views as a young child.
Is Bitcoin partially successful, perhaps in response to the fact that maybe the West, maybe the world in general, but it seems particularly the West, is much less meritocratic today, where people aren't supposed to get ahead of their merits, and those who do are demonized, it seems, in the West. Is Bitcoin somewhat of an answer to that, do you think, or what's the relationship?
I think Bitcoin appeals to those that are on a quest for truth or integrity. If you're an engineer, you appreciate the concept of conservation of energy. And if you're a mathematician, you appreciate the idea that 2 + 2 always equals 4. And so the mathematical beauty and the conservation of energy and the laws of thermodynamics that are sort of embedded in Bitcoin appeal to those who wish to design beautiful things that work, especially when they see things around them that aren't working.
I think that's a great response. You're an MIT guy. Is that your background?
Aerospace engineering, aeronautics and astronautics at MIT.
I said, this guy's 1,000 times smarter than I am. But I want to talk, as you talk about tech, you talk about your background. For people who don't know, you run MicroStrategy. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. What is it that MicroStrategy does?
MicroStrategy is an enterprise software company that sells business intelligence to about 5,000 large enterprises all around the world. Business intelligence software is used to design sophisticated analytic systems to extract insight from data. So banks use it to calculate credit risk. Retailers use it to calculate marketing and merchandising activities. Anybody that has large sums of data trying to figure out what to do next would typically create some kind of business intelligence application. And we have a set of software tools and servers that we sell to all those organizations everywhere on Earth.
And when did you start the company?
1989.
Okay, so over 30 years the company's been going. You're still running it. And you were, as I recall, originally a Bitcoin skeptic. Is that correct?
I think everybody starts that way. Yeah, I was a Bitcoin skeptic. In 2013, I thought it was going to go the way of online gambling, but I didn't really understand it, and I didn't really need it in 2013. And it was a much younger, more immature asset and a more immature network. So I think it took me till 2020 for me to need it. And then until you need it, you're not going to put in the effort to understand it. And luckily for me, by the time I needed it and by the time I understood it, it had matured to be a much stronger network.
It's interesting because so many people have been coming to us in the last year. They look at and I've heard you talking about this 2020, this calamitous year, which I think you've suggested. I mean, look at how well Bitcoin is done. And people have been coming to us because they're seeing for the first time the United States isn't what they thought it was, or their country, or their government's not supporting them the way they thought it was supposed to be. What is it that brought you around in 2020? Because I read that you were looking at different asset classes to move your treasury into, and it was gold, it was Bitcoin, there were different things. What is it that got you into Bitcoin, that turned you around?
I think the pandemic is a catalytic event and accelerated transformation in a couple of areas. Zoom went from 10 million users to 400 million users in weeks. Like we embraced remote work and video conferencing, and probably we leaped forward a decade. And in the same way, in March, we had a set of lockdowns, which really impaired Main Street assets and operations. But then we had a V-shaped recovery in Wall Street, and that K-shaped response, where Wall Street recovers and Main Street doesn't recover, caused me to stop and reassess everything that I knew about finance and economics. And at the same time as that, we had an aggressive fiscal response by the central banks everywhere in the world. And the real result of that is that the money supply that had been expanding by 5% a year for about a decade started expanding at 20 to 25% for this year. And now I realize, and we look out, and we have a forecast. I mean, most reasonable people would think we're going to continue to run deficits. The interest rates are going to continue to stay low. We're going to continue to create more M2 broad money supply. And we're going to be in a monetary inflation environment that looks more like 15% a year for the next 5 years instead of 5%. So 2020 was the year where you had a problem, and the problem got really big. In essence, the cost of capital for any corporation and any investor leaped from 5% to 15%. It used to be, if you didn't get a 5 to 8% return on your investments, you would say, I'm not keeping up, right? The S&P was about 8% return over the decade. And it makes sense to get 8% against the cost of capital of 5%. If the risk-free cost of capital is 5%, tack on 3% risk, you're at 8%. That's what the market looks like. What happens when the cost of capital goes to 15% and now you got to get 20% return on your cash? That ain't happening. On your bond, that ain't happening. On your real estate, on your stock. The only way you get over the hurdle rate is you either have to grow 20% like Amazon or Google or Facebook. You got to be a screaming great big tech company, or you have to leverage up. You have to borrow billions, buy back your stock, cut your share count in half, and that way leverage up your cash flows, which are growing less than that cost of capital. Everybody leveraged up for a decade. When the interest rate gets to zero or close to zero and everybody's got full debt on their books, you've leveraged the bonds, you've leveraged the real estate, you've leveraged the stocks. Big tech's had its run. What are you going to do? Right? And it's not a problem if you're just expanding at 5% a year, you're going to lose half your money over 12 years. Okay, you can think about it for a year or two. When the monetary supply is expanding at 15% a year, you're going to lose half your money over 4 years. And now you start thinking, well, I mean, half of my wealth is going to be cut in half unless I make a good investment. And every investment's getting a lot harder. It's very complicated. That'll shake you out of your comfort zone and kick you into a search for something new. And that's how I discovered Bitcoin. And that's how most people are discovering Bitcoin. They've been forced out of their comfort zone. They need a safe haven asset, which is not pegged to fiat cash flows. It's not a function of the cash flow forecast or the bond coupon or the real estate rents. So what would that be? Gold? Well, gold was the best idea in the 19th century. And we can have a debate over how it worked in the 20th century. But in the 21st century, if God came down and he created perfect gold, he would create 21 million gold coins, put it on a network that you could move at the speed of light if you wanted to, and make it impossible for anybody to ever create any more gold. He'd make it impossible for a bank to steal your gold. He'd make it impossible for anybody to lie to you about how much gold they had in the vault. He'd make it perfectly transparent and he'd give it to you. That's what Bitcoin is. It's digital gold designed with all of the attributes we love about gold, none of the liabilities.
How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.